Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at some aggregate supply side factors that can influence the level of economic activity. In terms of aggregate supply side factors, aggregate supply is the most critical thing for boosting long-term productive capacity and our long-term GDP. We've talked about some of the problems that can occur if aggregate demand continues to grow with an aggregate supply. So it's really important that we boost aggregate supply to boost our long-term productive capacity. These initiatives are all about trying to improve firms' willingness and ability to supply at any given price, and is really critical for our long-term productive capacity. So when we're talking about shifts in aggregate supply, we're either talking about shifts to the right, which will increase our productive capacity, or things that will reduce our productive capacity. And when we draw in the aggregate demand curve, and we look at the impact that it has on our overall level of economic activity, it's really important to boost supply to allow for lower prices and sustain levels of real GDP. So the thing that can influence the aggregate supply curve or cause movements along the aggregate supply curve are changes in the general level of prices. So the relationship between the level of aggregate supply and the general or average price level is a bit different to the aggregate demand equation. It doesn't just look as simple as a directly up curve or linear curve, and that's because at certain points it's a lot easier to match the level of aggregate demand with increased aggregate supply. So when we get closer to our productive capacity or the vertical section of aggregate supply, it becomes a lot harder to increase output. So bottlenecks will start to appear when we get close to our productive capacity, which limit our ability to produce. A definition of a bottleneck when we're at the point in the economy where if the economy is working at its productive capacity, any increase in demand will just block the production process rather than increasing output. So bottlenecks may appear due to things like due to a lack of spare capacity. They can include things like queuing at ports, traffic jams, or not having enough labour to meet desired output. So rather than demand stimulating production, it just leads to traffic jams, or it leads to bottlenecks basically in production or limits on our productive capacity. Aggregate supply is really important because a rise in the volume of resources or improved efficiency allows firms to increase their level of supply to meet aggregate demand so that inflationary pressures don't emerge. So if both curves can shift by an equal amount, we're able to sustain stronger growth without higher prices. Improved aggregate supply allows an economy to boost productive capacity and is the reason for really strong growth rates in the long term. So for example, like why countries like China can grow at 20% per year and still experience inflation rates of less than 2%. It also prevents stagflation when an economy experiences high inflation and low levels of economic growth, and that occurs because of poor supply side conditions. So things like climatic conditions can cause that, or higher oil prices and things like that can have negative impacts and can cause things like stagflation. So shifts in the aggregate supply curve mean that there's more favourable supply side conditions, and this can occur for a range of different reasons, but basically what it means is that firms are more willing and able to supply at any given price. Less favourable supply side conditions means that firms are less willing and able to supply at any given price. So now we're going to talk about a range of factors that can influence the level of supply or can shift the supply curve. So the first one, and then we talked about this when we looked at the PPF, the quantity of factors of productions. So if we get an increased quantity of land, labour or capital resources, that can allow us to shift our PPF to the right. And that can occur because, for example, we discover new oil. So that's an example of a land resource. That can improve a firm's ability to supply. So food production, for example, has been has increased from mechanisation, which basically means that we're using more machinery in production. So the use of oil is important for fertilising plants, and what can happen is that if we use up all our oil, that can reduce our ability to supply in the long term. So the use of oil in the production of fertilisers and pesticides and the ability to access resources from overseas can affect our long-term productive capacity. So it's a key resource that we need for agriculture, that we need for manufacturing, and therefore it can reduce our supply potential if it gets too expensive. Immigration is another one. So immigration adds to the pool of skilled labour, means that we've got a higher quantity of labour resources that we can use in the production process. It's also important for countering the impacts of an ageing population. So as we talked about in the previous video, a lot more people are retiring these days. So immigration can help to boost our workforce, boost participation rates, and increase our ability to supply. It's also important that we're investing in new capital. So technology and capital equipment can allow us to work more productively and therefore boost our supply potential as well. So firms that are introducing robots in the production process has allowed for them to increase their supply capacity. The thing with robots is they can work for longer hours, they don't get tired, and that can allow us to essentially boost our supply potential because they can work more hours at a faster pace than humans. Another way that we can boost our supply potential is boosting the quality of our factors of production. So for example, land. So if we use land in an unsustainable manner, it can reduce the quality of land. So farms, for example, that are using fertilizers and pesticides, while that helps to increase their yields or increase their output in the short term, in the long term it's reducing the quality of soil, and that could be something that reduces or shifts our supply curve to the left because we're using up the high quality land today, which can reduce the quality of that land going forward. So that's one example of how we may reduce the quality of our land resources. In terms of labour, the quality of labour is linked mainly to the health of the labour force and how educated the labour force is. So a more educated population is likely to be more productive, which can lead to lower costs of production. They're more likely to think of efficient methods of production. They undertake research into new technology, and they generally basically are involved in creating more high-end use products. So education is really critical for boosting our supply potential because it makes us more productive. It allows us to produce a greater level of output and meet extra demand. A healthier workforce is also likely to basically reduce their level of sick days. They're more likely to be productive, and therefore that can help to boost our supply potential as well. In terms of the quality of capital can also boost aggregate supply. So investing in new technology allows us to be more productive and provide goods and services that we haven't been able to in the past. So a current example, and again, it's good to be able to use current examples in terms of the quality of capital, is investing in the national broadband network. The idea of the national broadband network is to connect more people to the internet, and that's improving the ability of firms to offer goods and services at a faster rate. It's allowing for things like Skype and teleconferencing, which is all helping to reduce firms' costs of production. It's also allowing firms to communicate without having to travel, so that can reduce their cost of production because they don't have to spend the money on petrol and spend the money on paying for employees to stay overnight and things like that, and that can help to increase the quality of factors of production and boost our supply potential as well.